Okay, well, it appears to be 6:31, so we might as well bring this meeting to order. I want to thank everybody for coming out on this somewhat dreary and wet and cold and snowy and rainy Wednesday evening. Thank you for taking time out of your week to come and discuss this important visioning process. I would like to make a note that this meeting is going to be recorded, or it is being recorded presently, and will likely hit the airwaves of BCTV and be made available perhaps on Southwest Regional Planning Commission's website and other locations for future viewing. This is a presentation by the Existing Bridges Subcommittee. We are a subcommittee of the Hinsdale Brattleboro Advisory Committee, which was formed by New Hampshire DOT and VTrans to assist with the bridge replacement project at Route 119. Our particular charge as the Existing Bridges Subcommittee is to draft a vision for the reuse of the island and of the two bridges, the Charles Dana Bridge and the Anna Hunt March Bridge. To accomplish this, we are working with various consultants and assistants, both of which we'll hear from a little later on this evening. And we're gathering input from the public in these forums through surveys and other tools. And we're gathering all that together for eventual presentation back to the Project Oversight Committee so that they can be informed and they can work to inform the local and state governments as to the vision and to the level of public support we've been able to demonstrate for that vision. We are not tasked with implementing this project. We recognize there will be costs associated with this vision, that there may need to be a change in ownership in order for the vision to be implemented. Some entity is going to need to manage and maintain whatever is built. Some entity is going to need to deliver essential public safety services. All of this is going to involve negotiation between a range of governments: state of Vermont, state of New Hampshire, town of Hinsdale, town of Brattleboro. Our job is to present to them a vision to inform their discussions and their negotiations, and to speak about what's possible, what's desirable, and what the community finds attractive and would like to see for their community. So that's a little bit about what we're here to do and what we're doing. In order to save a little bit of time, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce the committee members rather quickly, just so we can kind of get to the meat of the meeting. But I would like to call out the various folks who have agreed to participate on this subcommittee. We've got Steve Barrett from the Public Works in Brattleboro, and Mark Kerrigan, the captain of the Brattleboro Police Department. We've got Jason Cooper from the Friends of the West River Trail. Steve Diorio, who's on the Hinsdale Select Board. Charles Ratage, the police chief in Hinsdale. Drew Hazelton from Rescue Inc. Catherine Lynch, who of course works for town of Hinsdale. Prudence McKinney, who has been a longtime volunteer in Brattleboro, has worked at the health department and is a big advocate for a number of health-related issues. Frank Podlensky, who's with the Highway Department in Hinsdale. Ed Smith and Sharon Smith, each from Hinsdale. Adam Grinold from the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. We are staffed principally by J.B. Mack. I want to thank you for all of your assistance along the way. He is with Southwest Regional Planning Commission. A little bit of housekeeping before we kind of get underway. I think I mentioned the meeting is being recorded. We ask everybody to keep their mics off until called upon to speak. There's going to be question and answer at the end of each agenda item or session, and there'll be a more lengthy Q&A towards the end of the meeting. We ask if it's appropriate, you can use the chat box. The chat box is found at the bottom center of your screen. It's one way to type in. And our plan is to wrap this meeting up by 8 o'clock. Our agenda for this evening includes what we're doing now, welcome introductions, after which time I'm going to ask JB Mack to review some feedback that the committee has received from the public and to go over some of the results of surveys that have been submitted and in particular some feedback that we gathered at the last presentation on, I think it was October 15th. Following that, we're going to hear a brief presentation from the New Hampshire Department of Transportation on their plans to particularly rehab the two bridges, not the islands, but the bridges themselves and the shape that they're going to be looking post-rehab. Next, we'll turn our attention to Chris Ramage, who is a graduate student with the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He is presently a grad student studying under Professor Robert Ryan in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Regional Planning, and we are deeply appreciative of the work that they have brought to bear on this process. Chris is going to be walking us through some recent changes and developments in sort of the concepts that we see as possible for the island. I would ask everybody to keep in mind, these are not blueprints. This is not construction documents. These are expressions of a vision, you know, a little more this and a little less that. So this kind of a concept. And then we're going to wrap up with some Q&A. And like I say, we hope to be wrapping this meeting up around 8 o'clock. But before we get on to anything, I'm going to pass it over to JB. He's got a couple of poll questions I know he likes to submit to everybody. So please, if you can, the poll is on the screen in front of you, and I'll let JB take the mic.
Thank you, Patrick. Just to get everybody, we are going to, Chris Ramage is actually going to have a number of poll questions during his presentation. This is just a primer for you to get used to using the poll function. Great to have everybody participate. Just have two simple questions here, and we'll keep it on for another 30 seconds or so. Thank you. Okay, we've got most people participating. Just give you a sense of who's on the call tonight. New Hampshire, Vermont, pretty well represented. We've got a couple of folks from Massachusetts. I think those are the folks from UMASS-Amherst. And how did you find out about the meeting? Most people heard through email, but people heard through word of mouth as well and some other means of communication. Thanks everyone for participating, and I'm going to take away the poll.
So JB, if we're ready, I would turn it back over to you to walk us through some of the public feedback that we've received so far.
Sounds great. I will, let me share my screen here. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Patrick, you see it? Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. All right, very good. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. Again, my name's JB Mack. I work at Southwest Region Planning Commission. What I want to do tonight is present some of the feedback that the Existing Bridges Subcommittee has heard so far regarding the vision for the reuse of the Charles Dana and Anna Hunt Marsh Bridges and Hinsdale Island, which is the area we'll be talking about tonight. My presentation will talk about results from the survey that we've been promoting And that survey is still open, by the way, if you haven't filled in the survey yet. I'll also summarize feedback we heard as a result of the first online forum that Patrick was talking about earlier on October 15th, which really represented the kickoff for our public outreach for this project. Before I get into the presentation, I want to make sure that all the attendees know that we recently set up a new webpage where we'll be placing a lot of information about this project. New Hampshire DOT also has a webpage that's looking at sort of the larger project, but this is something where that focuses just on the visioning process for the reuse of the bridges in Hinsdale Island. So we've set that up, and you can, if you'll note at the bottom, there's a webpage address as well. I'll be showing that on my last slide if you don't have time to write it down if you're interested. So let's talk about the survey. As of November 30th, we've received 73 responses so far. Most people coming into the that have responded to the survey so far are Vermonters, not Granite Staters. Really like to see more Granite Staters participate so we get a better sense of if there are any differences in state opinions. One of the things we asked people also is we wanted to make sure they were familiar with the area, so we wanted to get a sense of if they'd ever been to Hinsdale Island. 61 people out of the 73 said they had. But then when we asked them, how have you visited the island or gone through the island, we saw that actually it was more like 68 people. Most people, only 5 people had not really gone to the island. I think there's several people that have driven through it, but maybe not necessarily stopped at the island. And that's understandable given that it's Route 119 and it's just sort of a place to get from one place to another. One of the things that we looked at, or we asked folks in the survey, was the relative importance of the island in providing recreational, economic, environmental, or cultural benefits to the Hinsdale-Brattleboro area in the future. So the bar chart on this slide and the next one as well will show the number of people that responded: very important, dark green; important, light green; somewhat important, yellow; not important, orange; or I don't know, red. I've added some dotted lines showing where 50% and 70% of the respondents landed on the continuum of the responses. And as you can see, most of the people stressed that the island should provide environmental benefits to the area, though at least 3/4 thought that recreational and cultural benefits were also important. There was less enthusiasm around the importance of the island creating some kind of economic benefit, at least so far with the certain respondents we've heard from. The Existing Bridges Subcommittee developed 6 goals that it thought would be important for driving the visioning process for this project area. I'm not going to list them all for you right now, as you can read them on the screen, but in interpreting the results of the graph, I think it's instructive to look at where the green is, the most important or very important, as it relates to the 50% and 70% reference lines. So wherever you see more green, there's generally more support or thinks it's important. The goals that respondents found more important were that the area promote walking and biking, encourage recreational opportunities and river access, preserve natural areas, and ensure that the area is safe and clean. Goals related to economic development or saving fiscal resources were not rated as important. Our survey also asked what kind of activities should be promoted on Hinsdale Island. We listed 11 ideas and encouraged people to write in their own ideas as well. Again, using the 50% and 70% reference lines, we can see most people thought ensuring the island was preserving wildlife habitat and could be used for wildlife or scenic viewing were the most important. But a number of other ideas were also popular, but there was less consensus given. And that's partly because we asked people to choose no more than 5 activities. We asked them to prioritize. A similar question was asked about what kind of activities that should be promoted on the bridges. The two top contenders for this question were the ideas of having flowers or vegetation on the bridges and using the bridges for wildlife or scenic viewing. However, over 50% of the respondents also like the idea of seating areas or picnic tables. At the tail end of the survey, we asked people if there is any other input they'd like to leave with respect to the vision for the bridges and island area. And listed here are some of those ideas. Many emphasize trends that seem to come out of the survey itself, such as stressing the importance of having access to the water and preserving the area for wildlife. But many see this as a great way to insert art or provide new green space for children's play. One person imagined the island being a homage to the old island park from the early 1900s, where it was a center activity for both Brattleboro and Hinsdale. They imagined there being a carnival-like atmosphere, perhaps with a carousel. And another thought of the island bridge area as an important connection between area trails in Brattleboro and Hinsdale. I'm going to shift now to public feedback we received from the October 15th online forum. During that forum, we heard about all the activity that's going around this area and how important it is to incorporate or connect these other activities and plans with the island and bridge area. For example, people talked about connecting it or considering the Brattleboro Museum's redevelopment plans, Amtrak's redevelopment plans, the regional trail system on both sides of the river, the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail, and the newly launched Brattleboro Words Trail. Some inquired about parking access to the island, especially for people with disabilities. One made an argument that in the future, the existing bridges should be shifted from functional architecture to a cultural asset, and advocated for the idea of painting the bridges a bright color as a way to make them into a cultural attraction. Another stressed the importance of having a plan in place to maintain any new infrastructure or services, and warned against creating hardships on local taxpayers. After the October 15th online forum, we heard from a few more people. One person argued that it would be important to think about how the Connecticut River will be used in the future. They noted a rising trend in jet skiers and wondered if the river in this area should be more actively managed to separate motorized watercraft from swimmers and paddlers, especially if this area is going to attract more water activity. And others alerted us to some other examples of bridges or public spaces that might provide a source of inspiration for our bridges and island area. That concludes my presentation. I had to go through it pretty quickly, but summarized most of what we've heard so far, and our ears are still open. We're looking to hear more today. Want to again repeat that we have a landing page where videos and the survey and information about the existing bridges subcommittee, and that's shown here on the bottom right. And I've also added in the New Hampshire DOT page, which has all the information about the overall project, the DOT project. And I can take any questions if we have time. I can't see my clock right now, but.
JB, it's about 6:50. I don't see any questions in the chat, and unless somebody really wants to step forward and pose a question just yet, my suspicion is that we'll get a lot more comments and a lot more questions, particularly with the next two presentations. But if someone has something for JB right now.
I do see one question. There was a question about bike parking. We're at the very beginning of this process of envisioning what could happen on the bridges and island. So if bike parking is something that you'd like to see there, I'm assuming that's the case here. we'll consider that and log that in there as part of the data collection of public input.
If I could say something,
Mr. Abbott, was that you? Did you want to say something?
yes, I did. If I can say something, I think that,
Absolutely. Can I just say before you do, I am remiss because under the housekeeping, I should have reminded everybody. I think most folks are familiar with Zoom. If you wish to raise your hand, that would be helpful. That can be found under the participants. And so excuse me for interrupting with that. Once you go ahead, and then we'll ask others to continue to raise their hand, and we'll be calling upon folks. So go ahead, sir.
I just think it's, I find the number of 73 respondents to be disappointing, and I don't have an answer as to how we can acquire more, but I think it would be helpful to get more input. That's it.
Good point. I think you're right. You know, the final report from this committee that we present to the project oversight committee is going to carry more weight if there's certainly greater participation. So that is a worthwhile point. I notice also we have another hand raised. I believe that would be Gary Stroud. If we can bring up Gary's camera and microphone.
Yes, hi, Gary Stroud, District 2 Representative, Brattleboro. I guess I got to ask this question. I guess either Patrick or JB can answer. I was wondering, considering that once the new bridge is built and the old one to be utilized, and I guess you're going to plan on some type of utilization and beautification of the old bridge, because I was looking at the one by Chesterfield on how, what difference you're going to be doing to the old bridge that's here on this end by Canal Street than to the other one, because I like to fish. I'm a fisherman, so I love fishing. I love going down there and spending some quiet time trying to find a spot down there some days. But I'm hoping to see hopefully something in an area for people, I guess, that can get out there also and do some other activities as far as that's concerned too. So what do you see different from this bridge that's going to be different from the one by Chesterfield that's going to be more utilized by people? I don't know if because of demographics or that many people down that end versus the people in Hinsdale and this end, because a lot of people like to go down to the bridges and fish.
Well, Gary, I think one of the things I would say is I certainly hope that these existing bridges don't receive the same sort of, just letting them sit there. There is an island with these bridges, and I think that is certainly one thing that it's far more likely to attract people who are interested in recreation. There are really close businesses that I would imagine are going to be interested in making use of the space for maybe musical presentations or various entertainment or art type activities. I will say that our task is to craft a vision for what's possible. And I think, it's important to recognize that if this is to be successful, if it is to be implemented, it's going to need to be maintained. It's going to need to be kept safe, right? There's got to be access to essential public safety services there, police, fire, emergency medical service. All of that is going to need to be in place. Otherwise, this isn't worth doing. So I think I can speak for the committee to say that we'd like to see a better end result than the bridge in Chesterfield. And we'll definitely make note of your desire to be able to promote things like fishing. And I see a smile on JB's face. He might be a fisherman as well. So thank you, Gary.
I used to be a lobsterman.
Thank you.
Patrick, we should probably move on. We've got a pretty tight schedule. We can still
Excellent.
take questions later as well.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. Because I think there's going to be a lot more comments and questions after the following two proposals, particularly the second one. But at the moment, I think we should turn our attention to New Hampshire DOT and to Bill. I hope I get this right, Safian. And Bill is going to talk.
Safian, close enough.
Forgive me. Bill is going to talk to us about the plans, the plans for the physical bridges themselves and the rehab work and what's going to be done and what the conditions of these bridges are going to be post-project. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Bill.
Thank you. So you should all be able to see my screen. Is that true? Just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay. So just as a way of introduction, I'm here with Don Lyford, the project manager for the project, David Scott, the in-house design chief, Bureau of Bridge Design from the DOT, and also Trent Zanes and Tony King from the Bureau of Highway Design. So what I'm presenting tonight is sort of an overview of the existing bridges. I want to give you a little bit of background information about them, and then we'll just talk in real general terms about what the plans are from a DOT point of view of what we'll be doing to the bridges. So we're here talking about two bridges that carry 119 across the Connecticut River, the Charles Dana Bridge and the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge. Just real quick, what I'll be talking about, I'll show you where they are on a location map. We'll talk about some existing bridges, some of our inspection findings, what we're recommending for rehabilitation, some of the things that we're doing as far as cultural and natural resource review. Talk quickly about abutters and right-of-way, and then we're going to solicit input concerning certain topics with regards to these bridges. We'll talk about next steps, the anticipated schedule, and then I'll be open to any questions. So this is a location map. Hinsdale, New Hampshire is on the right side of the map, Brattleboro, Vermont on the left. And if you're traveling from New Hampshire to Vermont, you'd be coming on New Hampshire State Route 119 from the bottom right of this picture. You'd be first crossing the Charles Dana Bridge, which brings you to the island. And then at the other end of the island, you would cross the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge into Brattleboro. This is just a plan view and an elevation view of the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge. You can see it's a single span bridge. The island in this graphic, the elevation view on the bottom, side view of the bridge. The island is to the right-hand side and Brattleboro is to the left. And the top graphic is just a snapshot of the roadway, just traveling from right to left there. And this is the Charles Dana Bridge, same orientation of the graphics. The bottom is a side view or elevation view. This bridge is a little bit smaller than the other one, and it doesn't quite have the same span, and it has two approach spans, one on either side of the truss span that provide for a total of 3 spans for the bridge. And then the top view is just the plan view of the bridge with New Hampshire on the right and the island on the left of that plan view. Just some background information. The Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge, or the one closest to Vermont, was constructed in 1920, and it last saw major rehabilitation work in 1998. The Charles Dana Bridge was followed 7 years later in 1927, and also was last rehabbed in 1998. Both bridges had their decks replaced in 2004, and for the style of bridge, both bridges are what we call camelback through steel trusses, and the approach spans for the Charles Dana Bridge are rolled beam stringer approach spans, or just basically beam bridges. The substructures at the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge consist of granite masonry on the Vermont end of the bridge and reinforced concrete at the island end, still New Hampshire, but the island end of that bridge. And the Charles Dana Bridge has reinforced concrete of both abutments and piers throughout the structure. The roadway width on both bridges is about 20 feet wide, and both bridges carry a sidewalk to the upstream side of the bridge, and consisting of what you might call outriggers on the trusses and timber decks. Just some geometry here. The Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge is a total of 330 feet in one single span. The Charles Dana Bridge consists of 3 spans, the main truss span being 200 feet, and each approach span being 46.5 feet, for a total of 296 feet from one end of the bridge to the other. These bridges are routinely inspected, and they're graded on a scale of 0 to 9 relative to the National Bridge Inspection Standard Condition Rating Guidelines, 9 being excellent or basically new condition, 0 being a failed or a closed condition. And these bridges rate the same. There's 3 major components that are evaluated. One being the deck, which is what you walk on or ride on. The superstructure, which is all the steel that carries the load from the deck to the trusses, and from the trusses to the abutments on either end. And also the substructure, which carries all that weight or load to the ground itself. So those 3 components are evaluated on these 2 bridges. Both bridges, the deck condition is a 7 on that scale of 0 to 9. So they're in pretty good condition. The superstructure is the same for both bridges, and they are rated a 4 for both bridges, and that's the upper end of the poor condition. And the substructures are rated, they each have their own rating here. The Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge is a 6 or satisfactory condition, and the Charles Dana Bridge is a 5 at the top end of the fair condition evaluation. So overall, the bridges with the rehab are considered very favorable for saving and having continued service life once the rehabilitation is done. This is an end view of the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge, looking from the island towards Vermont, and you can kind of see on the deck, you can see some spots going on. This originally had a non-skid wearing surface, and that's pretty much worn off at this point. And they were made with precast deck panels, and a lot of the interface between the deck panels is beginning to spall and crack, as well as crack throughout the deck. So those are some of the concerns there. On the Charles Dana Bridge, it's paved across the bridge, and generally the paving surface is in pretty rough condition, and that's a visual representation of what is likely happening in the deck also below. So the deck is seeing some issues here as well. You can also see the generally failed paint condition on this bridge, resulting in you can see the rust forming and things like that on this bridge. So what are we looking to do? We're looking to rehab these bridges, which in general means that for the most part, everything about the bridges will remain. We're not looking to replace a lot on these bridges as far as member replacement, but we will be looking at the members that are critical to the support of the structure, and where we need to, we might do repairs, and that might be to put a new plate on, to add additional plate on, to replace rivets where they're deteriorated with high strength bolts, and things of that nature. So that's generally what we'll be doing, and that will pretty much cover all the steel that you see on the bridge, everything from the truss members, the verticals and diagonals, the gusset plates, which are plates that connect variously oriented members, horizontal, vertical, diagonal, where those all come together at a common point. They're all kind of sandwiched together in gusset plates. We'll be looking at seeing if we need to do anything with those gusset plates to make them adequately able to handle the anticipated loads. The floor system, which is kind of underneath the concrete decks, you don't really see a lot of that from the perspective of being on the bridge, unless you're but if you're boating, you might look up and see floor beams and stringers. Those are the steel components that carry the load from the deck to the trusses. And we'll be looking again to, not looking at having to replace a lot of we're having to replace those, but rather if we need to, putting on plates or things of that nature to make them adequately strong. Likewise, for sway bracing and bearings, we'll be looking at cleaning those up, replacing them, or not replacing them, adding if as needed plates or things of that nature to bring them up to speed. There is one location or one aspect, one component of the bridge called the lateral bracing that HTA is the consultant advising us on what needs to be done as far as the rehab on these bridges. And they've noted that there is likely the need to replace some of the components here. The lateral bracing, you really wouldn't see, again, from the deck, but if you were underneath the bridge in a boat looking up, they kind of form X-shaped components that go between floor beams and trusses and give some stability to the bridge. So they're secondary members, but still they're important members, and we would want to make sure that they are adequately doing their work. Some of the other work that we're looking at doing, we'll replace the expansion joints on the bridges. We'll be completely replacing the decks and the wearing surfaces on the bridges. Part of the rehab will be to remove the sidewalks that are existing today. And since we are turning these bridges into pedestrian bridges once we're done with them, essentially pedestrian bridges, the traveling pedestrians will cross where cars cross today. So there's no need for the sidewalk on the exterior side of the bridges. And so we'll be removing those to lighten the load, if you will, that the trusses have to carry. So we'll be, when we replace the decks, we'll be putting new railing on, pedestrian style railing, so that it meets the requirements for pedestrian bicycle usage and provide new rail. We'll be removing the existing paint from the structures and repainting them. We'll be doing concrete repairs to the abutments, wing walls, and piers. And in order to prevent general vehicular access, we'll be installing removable bollards at both the Vermont approach to the bridge and the New Hampshire approach to the bridge that are removable, so if emergency vehicles need to access onto the island, they can do that. Some of the things that we are considering, have considered and continue to consider with regards to the rehabilitation recommendations are the additional construction costs and also the long-term maintenance costs. We want to make sure that the structures remain accessible for emergency and maintenance vehicles. We want to ensure the public is adequately safe when they're using these bridges. We want to consider the environmental impacts that the rehabs might have during the course of that work, any property impacts, and of course, extending the service life of the bridge beyond when we're done the rehab. So this is just a graphic representing a cross-section of the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge, which is the bridge closest to Vermont. And the graphic on the left shows the existing condition. And basically, if you took a slice through the bridge and you looked at it from the end of your slice, this is what you'd be seeing. If you can see my mouse moving here, you've got the sidewalk to the upstream side. So we're actually looking towards the island here. This is the deck where a vehicle would be riding, and the floor system, the stringers and the floor beams that carry the load to each truss, which is represented vertically on the sides here. And then there's other members that keep the truss stable, various kinds of bracing stuff. So where our work is focused is on the truss members and also the secondary members of the trusses in our rehab. But you can see that the biggest visual cue of the difference here is that the sidewalk is now gone from the exterior of the trusses, and we are putting a new deck, new pedestrian height railing on the new deck, so for pedestrian passage across the bridge. So really, there won't be much visually different on the trusses themselves. The main visual difference will be all on the deck level. This is the Charles Dana Bridge, and it's essentially the same thing. We are going to remove the deck from the projecting outside the truss because pedestrians, bicyclists will now be crossing on the deck itself. And we'll be providing new rail and new deck rehab of the truss components and the other structural components, both above the deck and below the deck. So we are coordinating with both the cultural review agencies and the natural resource agencies throughout this project. And basically our cultural review has to make sure that we're adequately preserving the historic nature of these bridges, and that everything that we're proposing will be within Secretary of Interior standards for historic structures. And as far as natural resources is concerned, we just have to show our impacts, temporary impacts, any permanent impacts that we may have with regards to the rehabilitation, and make sure those are adequately documented and mitigated. As far as right-of-way and abutters are concerned, we don't currently anticipate any property rights will be needed for the rehabilitation, although we may need some temporary easements for construction access and things of that nature to complete the work. So some of the things that we're looking for input on, right now our rail is a type of rail that we use on our roadway bridges when we have pedestrians. So if there was a sidewalk on the road, you'll see that the new bridge, once it's complete, will have the same style rail that we're going to be using during the rehab of these two existing bridges. So it's a modern rail. It's crash tested and all those things. So that's what we're anticipating using. But if there's any input on rail type and aesthetics that we can make function for a pedestrian rail, and also a vehicular rail, because it's got a function for emergency vehicles going across the bridge, we could consider that. If there's any input on emergency or mutual aid response across the or accessing across the bridges, input on that. It's already been mentioned, input on recreational use and perhaps impacts during construction, temporary impacts during construction, local events, and possible impacts during construction, bridge and user safety concerns, or any other concerns you may have. We'd be interested in hearing from you tonight or at any time with those concerns. So our next steps, we will continue with our natural and cultural resource agency reviews. We have presentations coming up in December for both of those reviews. We will then finalize the rehabilitation recommendations, develop the preliminary plans, and then move into contract plans and other documents required to be able to put the project out to bid. Our schedule, we are working on preliminary plans this winter, begin contract plans following that, and to be anticipated to be completed by the spring of 2023. The rehab of these bridges will begin once the new bridge is complete and open to traffic, and that's anticipated to be in the summer, to be in 2024. So we'll be looking to advertise this bridge in 2024 and have construction happen in the spring of 2025. If per chance the construction of the new bridge goes better or quicker than anticipated, there is a chance that we might be able to, since we have some time between anticipated contract plan completion in 23 and advertising in 24, there might be an opportunity to move that up in schedule and begin sooner. But right now, this is the schedule that we're anticipating. And with that, I'll open it up if there's any questions.
Yes, hi, Bill. I have a few questions. The first one is from Mike, and he asked if the current guardrail will be removed.
Yeah, so the current guardrail will be removed, and perhaps I shouldn't have stopped sharing my screen. Let me share again real quick. I can back up to my presentation. Oh, I just lost it. Not sure what I did. Did my screen go black on you guys?
Yes, it did.
Yes, it did.
Sorry, let me try and do that again. Essentially, but the answer to the question is, yes, the guardrail will be removed both on the island and across the existing guardrail on the bridges, which is kind of attached to the really close to the trusses, will be removed, and the new rail will become integral with the new deck. So it'll provide a steel rail with horizontal bars across it, coming across the bridges. Again, I'll try and share and see if I can make this happen.
And Bill, will it be removed from the approaches as well?
Yes, it should be. So I'll say yes and no. Immediately off the bridges, there needs to be protection for vehicles, emergency vehicles that might be going across the bridges, but also pedestrians that we want to protect from getting too close to the edge, right on the approaches, and falling down adjacent to the abutments or something of that nature. So there's likely to be an approach rail that will come off the bridge and terminate in the vicinity of each end of the bridge, and the length of that will be dictated by whatever we need to protect and things of that nature. But on the island itself, it should be removed and much less than what's there now, I would think. But that will be part of the rehab design that we'll have to assess how far it needs to go on either end of the bridge.
Okay.
I just want to see if I can you see what I have now shown on the screen? It was back to, I just tried to make it big and it went away. I'm very sorry. I can't get my computer to cooperate.
We can still see it.
You can see it, Bill.
Oh, you can still see it. So if you see, I can't see it, but anyway, if you look down on the deck level, on either side of the deck, you'll see what looks like a post and 4 rectangles. Those 4 rectangles represent horizontal bars that are going along the length of the bridge, and they're attached to those posts, which are probably spaced every 6 to 8 feet across the bridge. So they're attached to the deck, and they'll be integral with the new deck. So what is there now for guardrail will be replaced with this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bill. There's been a couple questions about why is the pedestrian portion of the bridge being removed? Is it for any particular reason?
So what's happening is right now we're not removing pedestrian access to the bridge. We're just moving the location where pedestrians will cross the bridge. So right now vehicles are using the space in between the trusses to traverse the river, and that means pedestrians, in order to keep them safe, cross on the outside of the truss along their own path. Because we are removing vehicular access to the bridge once these rehabilitation is done, because all the vehicular traffic will be now going across the new bridge that we build, since vehicle traffic is not needed or allowed to pass in where they do today, that space is now available for pedestrian and bicycle usage. So we're not eliminating pedestrian passage. We are just moving the passage from on a dedicated sidewalk outside the trusses to the entire deck inside the trusses.
Thank you. I think that answered everybody's questions. I think we're ready to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Catherine, for the Q&A. We are running a little bit over time, but that's okay. These are important questions, and there are more important questions to come, I'm sure. We're going to turn it over now to Christopher Ramage, our graduate student, and he's going to walk us through a presentation, and I believe he's got some inquiries. What do we think of this and what do we think of that? And Professor Ryan is with us as well. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thanks for the introduction, Patrick. So please just speak up if you don't see my screen pop up in just a moment here.
Looks good.
All right. Get my little black box out of the way. There we go. All right, so today I'm going to be presenting to you all an initial working design concept for this project area titled The Living River, and this is to reflect both the amazing amount of life that can be found within the project area and the amazing amount of recreation and other living activities that are currently occur here and can potentially occur here. So to get started, I just want to go over this presentation is broken down into 3 main sections. This first section will be briefly going through a sort of a very zoomed out conceptual design plan, which is the stage that we're at now, which is still the initial stage. We're going to follow this with a visual preference survey, where for a number of the proposed spaces we're going to talk about in the design plan, I will show a handful of different images of similar space types, but with different scales, different design elements, and it'll allow for some direct feedback via survey questions as to preferences for what should happen within this project. And then at the very end, and since we're behind, we might run over a little bit with this part, we're going to open it up to address comments and questions from you all. And I would encourage you, as you think of a comment or question, as you've been doing, please just throw it in the chat, or write it down on a scrap of paper so that you don't forget it, because this feedback is really important to the process and we want to hear it. So just briefly, to get to this point, a lot of site inventory analysis has been done. This is just a smattering of different things that have been looked at: existing soils on the island, vegetative communities, slope analysis, sort of evaluating and taking note of qualitative aspects of different spaces on the bridges, the islands, thinking about where it will be easiest and most difficult to introduce any type of structure. In addition, quite a bit of work was done before I formally even got involved in this, and that was by an undergraduate studio run in the spring under Professor Robert Ryan. And the material generated from this was what our previous public presentation went over. And as mentioned several times before, you can still access this recording and the survey that went with it that JB presented the results of earlier on the SWR-PC website. So this is sort of what we call a napkin sketch. General ideas, concept ideas is on the approach from either the Vermont or New Hampshire side. You have this what we call a gateway, a corridor, or a series of spaces, where you are going to be exiting from one space and entering into another. And this transition, is sort of unique because it's carried across the bridges on either side, the Anna Hunt Marsh and the Charles Dana. And so with that, on either end, whether you're coming from Vermont or New Hampshire, you then arrive on the island, which is a gateway to or from the island. Before, we were talking about a gateway to the river or to the town if you're leaving the river. And these are going to be important spaces when we're thinking about how the proposed design for the island works and for locating some of the amenities or more heavily used spaces. This northern half of the island, which is sort of cut into 2 chunks by the existing Route 119 road base, is primarily being thought of as a semi-managed landscape. So primarily for habitat, for scenic viewing, for passive recreation, but it will require some management as we have some quite aggressive and non-native plant communities there that both impair it ecologically, but also impair safety by blocking sight lines and whatnot. And then finally, the southern portion of the island, with the exception of the road base, is going to be treated as a conserved landscape. It's you have basically standing marsh here, completely hydric soils, and some quite important wetland habitat. And so that's going to be visually accessible, but not so much physically accessible. And so here we see sort of a slightly finer tuned rendering of working concept. Again, Brattleboro, the way we're looking at this, Brattleboro is on the left. We see the Hinsdale Island in the center and Hinsdale on the right. And so we're going to sort of step through this design relatively quickly, this conceptual design from left to right, starting over in Brattleboro at the current 5-way intersection. So with the transfer of the existing bridges to pedestrian ways, most of the traffic load will no longer be coming up this hill from the river, which has the potential to allow us to bump out the current very narrow sidewalk by removing a dedicated left-hand turn lane with reduced traffic volumes. It's likely that a single lane for all turns in all directions can handle vehicles flowing out from the Whetstone Brewery and the Amtrak station. This will provide for both a safer, more enjoyable experience as you move down towards the river. Adjacent to where the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge abuts on the Vermont side, we have an existing town-owned open space. And in this concept, we're proposing that this is thought of a bit more formally and sort of creatively to better utilize it, or at least utilize it more than it currently is. So proposing it sort of as a river porch park, front porch onto the Connecticut River. It is a brownfield, so extensive plantings are not so much an option here, but we can get quite creative as far as what we put on top of the surface, whether that be planters, whether that be movable furniture, temporary installations, and the like. Additionally, we're noting an opportunity to introduce a kayak launch on the Brattleboro side, just a little bit further south, where you have the turnaround adjacent to the currently unoccupied archery building. We already have that turnaround for easily getting in and out and dropping off equipment. And while still steep, the bank grade is slightly more accessible here. And so that would be a proposed place to put in a ramp down to a small floating launch dock. Continuing to move along the proposed greenway, you'd be crossing the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge. And both bridges are primarily going to be viewed as functionally a transitory space, a space you move through, but it doesn't need to exclusively be that. And in our survey, one of the things we're going to be looking at is, what do you all prefer as far as how these bridges are designed? It can be, completely just, this is a roadway, but basically for people and bikes, and they're moving across it. But it can be, other things can be done too that allow for pausing, that allow for gathering, or for some temporary events or programming to occur as well. As you enter the island from the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge, both the topography and the adjacencies really lend it to being a larger welcoming space. And so here we're proposing a few different space types. At the top, at the level of the roadway, we're going to have sort of a form of a gateway plaza, a slightly larger expanded open space that you arrive into. There's an opportunity for this to be used for different types of events, for different types of vehicles to come in here, such as food trucks and park. Adjacent to it to the south, again, working with the existing grade, is proposed some form of either amphitheater or gathering in performance space. You have the potential to work some form of seating into that hillside with again, some form of performance space or stage facing it. On the other edge of this proposed Gateway Plaza, we have a steeper embankment down towards the northern end of the island. And there's proposed here what we call a play hill, where you utilize the grade to introduce design elements for children and adolescents to climb over, slide down. So this can be netting floating over the grade. This can be slides in the embankment. This can be blocks of stone or secured logs that you can climb up and down. Moving slightly further along the main access, you have a path system that brings you down to the water's edge, where it's currently being envisioned as some form of water access. And again, the survey question is going to start getting at what sort of scale and sort of what you want that to look like. So here, as drawn, you see a small inlet. This inlet would be created. There's currently a depression in grade, but it's still a foot or so above water level. And so if you actually wanted to bring the water into the island, that would require slight excavation where that happens. Adjacent to that, you can sort of see a bit of what another option is, which is using the existing shoreline, but simply picking a spot where you remove vegetation to increase access. And this is being viewed as also an opportunity to pair up with some form of beaching of small craft like kayaks and paddle boards, docking of slightly larger craft like small motorboats, to enhance the ability for people traveling up and down the waterway to stop, access the island, maybe even walk into town for lunch. Here you see a lot of red boxes that are covering a lot of the island. So sort of as mentioned previously, the majority of this island is being viewed as a space to be passively managed and passively used, with a focus on wildlife habitat, wildlife viewing, and scenic viewing. Again, with the largest section of that and the physically inaccessible section of that being the marshlands on the southern tip. And I should point out that in this design, along these secondary pathways off of the main access, you see penciled in several viewing platforms for this specific purpose. One on the northern tip here should be slightly elevated to allow for sight lines up and down the river and of the Brattleboro skyline over the existing shrubby marsh vegetation. You will have a small bump out right off of the main access, again looking north, but this time towards the Wonostoquit Mountain and scenic area. And then you have two facing south off of the main access, looking across this wetland and marsh habitat area. Towards the easternmost edge of the island, and just across from it on the New Hampshire shoreline, we have what are two even older bridge foundations that have currently been adopted by local fishermen as a great place for fishing. There's relatively little to no vegetation up against them, so they extend right up the water, which is great for not having tangled lines. They sort of offer their own natural seating off of the edge. And so these are being proposed as primarily dedicated to that purpose. They're also sort of small gathering spaces, but formalizing and easing access to them with some sort of pathway. Charles Dana Bridge, again, similar to as I was discussing with the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge. It's going to be a greenway, a transitory path, but we have the ability to also create spaces to bring art onto it, bring in seating for scenic viewing or wildlife viewing. And this can all be done too in a movable fashion, non-permanent planters, non-permanent seatings that can be rearranged to suit the needs of the day or removed for larger events. Finally, on a section of town-owned, either state or town-owned land, just to the north of the Charles Dana Bridge abutment on the New Hampshire side, There is another opportunity for water access and sort of a mirroring kayak launch, but from the New Hampshire side. This will have to work in with the plans of Vermont DOT, or excuse me, New Hampshire DOT, as for a lot of the construction being done along Mountain Road and the current Route 119, they're going to need to use some of the space to infiltrate stormwater coming off of those surfaces. And so this water access could also double up as, again, that opportunity to get to that older bridge foundation for fishing or scenic viewing access. And finally, a really important aspect of this is visioning how future connections, as opportunities arise, can be sort of engineered in as possibilities for connecting to existing trail networks close by. Perhaps the closest one is the trailhead at the end of Mountain Road to the Wonostoquist Mountain State Forest and its extensive trail system. However, the two others, and often brought up, are an opportunity on the Brattleboro side to at some point create a spur connecting the current end of the West River Trail to this proposed greenway. And on the New Hampshire side, connecting, again, the current end of this proposed greenway to the Fort Hill Rail Trail, which I believe ends roughly a mile further down the current Route 119 roadway. So that was a lot, but we're going to keep moving. And again, please put your comments and questions into the chat or note them down, because we're going to be getting to them after this. So the visual preference survey, I will be showing you several options for a number of these space types we just talked through. And as far as the examples I've pulled, I've tried to pull a wide range, and I haven't shied away from pulling perhaps some that are a bit big compared to what some people may be thinking as the appropriate scale for this project. And again, that's because this is the visioning process, and the most important thing is to elicit feedback, whether it's, you know, no, definitely not, that is not what I'm thinking of, or yeah, that's you know, right along the lines, or something like what I think would be correct for the space. One other sort of note before we get into it is that these examples we're going to be showing, they're not intended to represent exact proposed designs. You know, if like proposal A gets the most votes, we're not going to build proposal A. It's just to help get feedback from you, the public, and the stakeholders in this project as to what types of design elements do you think are right for a space? What scale and size of a space do you think is right for this project? And so those are the terms I would ask you to think about when you respond to this. You know, tell us, is this the kind of thing that you think would be best for this project we're discussing? So first, we're going to be looking at bridges. We're calling this example Bridge A. You can see in the two pictures, it's primarily devoid of real intensive design elements. You know, you have lighting, you have railings, and there is a few seating opportunities with benches viewing out over the landscape. But this is a relatively hands-off approach. The focus is that it's a space for moving across and through. This type of approach costs less money. It involves less maintenance. And since we're not introducing a bunch of vegetation, it's, relatively doesn't make a difference one way or another as far as adding environmental benefits. So Bridge B, quite a different approach. Now, a lot more has been done here. They've taken some creative liberties with this sort of caging roof and the superstructure over the bridge. They've brought in lighting as a design aspect. It's believed this one is nicknamed Rainbow Bridge due to the different lights that come on at night. And they've introduced some planting, some minimal planting along the edges. And you can also see that the way this one is laid out, most of the time, the focus, again, is on moving through it. But as you can see on the right, it's also designed in such a way and treated in such a way that they're using it for special events and during which they may bring on additional elements. You can see here, it's almost set up a bit like almost an indoor space along the edge with cushioned seating areas, small tables, and whatnot. More is being introduced, so this costs more. This would take some more to maintain. You know, you have some limited vegetation, which will require some care, and I assume, you know, any sort of lighting or art-based aspects will also require some maintenance, and you're introducing some planting, so there's some additional environmental benefits. Bridge C, some of you may recognize this. It is a local example. An old bridge completely repurposed as a linear garden. This is cost quite a bit more than the previous examples, requires quite a bit more maintenance, and with such a large amount of plant material introduced, it does have some more environmental benefits. So at this point, we're going to try it out. JB should be administer the survey question. It will have 5 choices, not just the A, B, and C examples that we went over, but you also have the choice to let us know that you like the idea, but you just don't think any of the examples shown here come close as to being the appropriate scale or scope or have the right design elements. And you can also just tell us that you don't think, you know, any of these types of uses at any scale are appropriate for this project we're discussing here, the Hinsdale Brattleboro project. JB, do you have a certain amount of time you have in mind for?
I'm gonna watch the attendees answering the questions. We're about 60% of the way there now, so give it a little bit more time.
Yeah, you just let me know when you close it, and we'll keep moving.
Okay. We'll give people about 20 more seconds here. Okay, we'll end the polling now. Just going to share the results so people have a sense of where your peers are at. Okay.
All right. Thank you, JB. So our next space, we're going to be looking at a few different examples of gathering spaces or more formal amphitheaters. Amphitheater A, is again primarily a lower cost, lower maintenance, and lower developmental intensity approach to creating a gathering space. You don't have it doesn't require really any paving. We're not talking about expensive hardscaping. Just some small platforms, some simple, it looks like in this case, wooden-based seating options with some room to bring in, as you can see on the right, additional tables or other equipment as needed for the event. It's relatively small in scale, perhaps maxing out at between 50 and 80 people fitting comfortably here. So this would not be for, say, like a headlining music festival, but more like what's shown here, you know, local, more local band. On the right, you see an example of sort of a nature education-based talk. Amphitheater B, we're moving up in cost and maintenance. It is definitely more intensive of a development. More space is being used up, so that requires, or that it entails more clearing of vegetation. You have more hardscaping, which means a lot more earth disturbance. So not as many environmental benefits to this option. You definitely have the capacity to hold larger events and a wider variety and type of events. And again, more formalized seating, right? You have stone seating walls, you have a paved stairway with railings heading down. Finally, we're looking at option C. This is one more scale in size. So whereas option B, you know, you might be able to hold 1 to 175, maybe 200 people in there if you were going to max out capacity. This one can probably go higher, anywhere between 200 to 400 people. Again, it uses more expensive formalized stonework, hardscaping. This one, they've taken the approach, though, of either leaving or planting trees within the gathering space, creating an overhead canopy. And so this does have better environmental benefits than Amphitheater B. You know, all the different things that come along with having trees present on the site. So again, here's our summary page. The same survey question with the same options are going to come up. We'll give you a minute or so here to plug in your answers.
I think everybody that was going to vote has. So, well, maybe not. Hold on 1 second. There we go. I'm going to end the polling now and show you the results again. Most people interested in A.
All right, moving on.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, moving on to space 3, we're going to be looking at considering a handful of different ways to provide docking access for a variety of watercraft. And so what we're calling dock A, this is basically the no dock option. Simply providing a space for which people who do either set anchor or, depending on the vehicle type, boat type, beach their craft, have an opportunity to come onto shoreline. So while this is definitely not at the scale that would be appropriate for this island, the idea is that to convey the form of docking, as in not having any sort of new structure introduced, new dock structure, instead finding a suitable section of shoreline adjacent to a suitable section of river channel for setting anchor, from which people can wade in through the shallows to the shoreline and onto the island and park and trails. So again, this is sort of the least expensive option, least maintenance. It does involve, to some extent, clearing shoreline and that of vegetation so that you can easily get to and from your watercraft. And so that does have some negative environmental connotations attached to it, which need to be balanced with the desire for recreation. Option B basically involves introducing pilings to a certain area adjacent to the island where that would be identified as appropriate for vehicle docking. And so these pilings would allow opportunities for tying up watercraft. In all these scenarios, it's sort of assumed that there will be some place to simply just pull up any sort of kayak or paddleboard. Any kayak or paddleboard. But for the other ones, such as different size motorboats or pontoons, this option, it involves some structure, so it's a little more costly. There's a little bit more maintenance involved. There's not a floating dock, so it doesn't require taking anything out of the water for the winter before ice flows come through. And it potentially may involve clearing less shoreline, depending. So these are rough sort of what's the word? Ratings. And it really does depend on the nuance of what the final design proposal is. But anyway, maybe more beneficial environmentally if we're not clearing a big section of shoreline. Then dock C, we're looking at some sort of formal structure. You see one here, a floating dock attached to shoreline with a ramp, and on the left is sort of the construction phase of this particular project, and at the end of it, it was an ADA accessible dock. So you could navigate down there on a wheelchair and launch in a kayak, or be helped onto a motorboat if you had a motorboat. With along the edge options to secure and tie in parallel to the dock motorboat, and this wouldn't cost the most, involve the most maintenance. With the ice flows that come down the Connecticut, having something like this sticking up the island through winter, it would likely be heavily damaged or swept away. So we're talking about needing to take it out of the water, put it back in on a seasonal basis. So the drill at this point. JB is going to put that survey question up. You have about a minute, give or take. We'll wait until it looks like everyone has voted, and then we'll continue moving on. All right, so it looks like JB closed the poll. A bit more split than perhaps some of the others, but again, option A pulling in the most from our participants in this meeting. Next, we're going to be considering a few different types of water access for recreation, and sort of more geared towards from the island side. And so option A is a very low impact water access, picking a very limited spot. So we're not talking about, thinking about a river type of beach here, but literally, a pathway, perhaps a stairway, perhaps simply a small section of cleared vegetation that leads you down to the water's edge, where you can touch the water, wade in, interact with it in some sort of perhaps more limited capacity. This is low cost. This is low maintenance. It doesn't involve much disturbance of the existing vegetation or the existing shoreline. So out of the options, this is likely going to be the one with the least negative environmental impacts, and therefore, inversely, the most benefit. Revisiting these photos, this time thinking about, if you are not the person driving up a boat, but if you are someone who wants to use more of a traditional beach-like setting on a river. This is actually, these pictures are from the Connecticut River, just downstream in a different town. So again, perhaps not necessarily in this scale. We're talking about a different size landscape with our island here, but the idea of finding an appropriate location where some vegetation can be cleared, but not changing the existing shoreline edge as far as where it's land and where it's water, just clearing it and making it more usable. More cost involved, more maintenance involved than option A. Less environmental benefits. This does require the removal of more vegetation. Finally, option C. This might be if you take the skyscrapers out of the background, this is on an island in a different city. This is showing what an inlet sort of situation could look like. So in this bottom right hand, you see where they altered the shoreline to allow water to come in to this island, and then introduced this fine cobble and large boulder substrate, and created a naturalized place for wading and play, and that is highly accessible via path systems to visitors of the island. Some form like this would allow for the small, like kayak and paddleboard craft, to come into the inlet and then pull up their craft. This involves much more earth moving and much more disturbance, so it costs likely the most and involves the most maintenance out of the three proposals. And again, not entirely not the most environmentally sensitive compared to option A. So here comes that survey question for you all. We've got about 2 more spaces, I believe, after this, and then we'll be opening it up for the general questions and comments section.
I'm just going to give it a little bit more time. We're getting about 30 people answering per question.
Okay.
We're at 28. I'll give 10 more seconds.
All right, so again, you can see the results hopefully on my screen. Again, option A brought in the most votes, although there was a fair number in sort of the second most popular option C, and similar to the others, a smattering for the other 3 options. Okay. So here we're going to be looking at examples of play hills for the space proposed towards the end of the island, closer to the Brattleboro side of this project where the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge attaches, using the existing steep embankment on the northern edge of the road base. So you see option A, it's relatively on the smaller scale, a single slide with rubber padding that allows for kids, and if you want to, adults to climb back up on the side. Otherwise, you can sort of go around on an informal footpath. Highly vegetated with desirable species, ecologically desirable species on either side. So pretty low impact, pretty high on environmental benefits. There's going to be some cost involved with installation. There's going to be some cost involved with maintenance for, whatever surface is your landing pad. And likely, as the years go by, at least in this example, things like mats, relatively non-hardscape features that have lots of traffic would need to be occasionally replaced. Playhill B, we're looking at a more intensive version, kind of a Playhill A. We're introducing more than one slide, but in addition, this hillside has been terraced with these sort of geometric looking planters, and then also including sort of these artificial stone scrambles, rock scrambles that over which kids and adults can climb back up if they would rather take the adventurous route rather than a formal path that goes around the backside and leads back up. Still a fair amount of planting here, a fair amount of permeable surfaces, so still pretty beneficial environmentally. There's more hardscaping both with the retaining planters and with bringing in that masonry and securing it, so higher installation cost, and especially with retaining walls, likely going to be more maintenance. And if not for that, just the fact that there's more than one slide, you're going from one slide to many slides, so more options for something to wear through over time and need repair or replacement. So option C for a play hill is completely on the other side. Here we're looking at a completely devegetated section of hillside. They've replaced whatever the pre-existing surface was with one of these sort of shredded and rubberized surfaces. It's easy for traction. It doesn't hurt as much if you fall, but it's relatively impermeable. Again, all vegetation has been removed, so not so much beneficial environmentally. And again, compared to Playhill option A, you have more equipment, you have more surfaces that need to be installed, so it's going to cost more to install and maintain. So here's the recap on these 3 Playhill options. And survey questions should be up.
Okay, I think that's everybody that's going to vote.
Great, we're getting fast at this. Okay,
Share the results.
so it looks like we're pretty evenly split between either option A or option E of I don't think any of these scenarios are a good fit for the area. And there are a couple of people who, I'll move it out of the way, preferred option B. So I think our last survey question is going to be looking at plazas, and especially for this one, again, keep in mind that we're not, even though a lot of these examples are from cities, we're trying to focus more on the sense of it, the scale, the scope, the sense of enclosure or openness of the space, because of course there's going to need to be serious tailoring of any sort of gathering space proposal for a natural island versus a more intensely developed cityscape. But with that aside, Plaza A, what we're looking at is a fairly open gathering space, both in terms of sight lines in and out, in the scale of the space, it's fairly large, and in the the sort of flatness and lack of a ton of furniture or other elements in the center of the space. Right, seating options are around the edges, and so you have this fairly large, fairly flexible space in the center that could be used for a wide variety of events. And some costs, some maintenance involved, depending on the degree of vegetation or not, on how permeable of a surface you pick. It can have varying environmental benefits or not. Plaza B, and I would point out again, ignoring the sort of waterfall in the background, that's likely not going to be a highly feasible installation for a project. But this one is very different in that now we're looking at a very enclosed plaza. They're from the camera angle, and there are sight lines in, and you can sort of think about it as, this would be along the main roadway. So get rid of the waterfall, the space extends and narrows down to a path up ahead, and you're coming off of the bridge. But the other two sides provide a sense of enclosure, and in this case they're providing a sense of enclosure by using trees to create a bit of a roof over your head too. Also very different is this plaza, it's not open, it's very busy, taken up with seating options, with planters, and with planted trees. There's a lot more vegetation going on here, so better environmental benefits. This one also has pavers, which, depending how installed, would have a degree of permeability. Or maintenance. It's a little bit more intensive, so it's going to be a bit more costly. Plaza C, and this one is a bit easier to imagine, as it's a roadway that has been adopted for this purpose as a plaza. This is lowest cost, lowest maintenance, probably the closest to visually how any sort of plaza option would be integrated into an existing roadway, what used to be 119. As far as within the space itself and not on the edges, no vegetation here, so we're not introducing more environmental benefits, and we're talking about a more traditional pavement surface that is completely impermeable. But again, very flexible. It can be used as a corridor. It can be used as a plaza in this space, bringing in food trucks. You can have either informal or bring in more formal seating elements. So here we go again. We've got option A. It's very open. It's a very open space, and a bit more traditional of a plaza. Option B, it's closed. It has a lot more vegetation, a lot more seating options. Feels more like an outdoor, intimate room, just as a large gathering space. And then option C, sort of a hybrid. It's open, but not as open as option A, and also we're talking about it's a bit more of a linear space lengthwise.
Okay, I'm gonna end the polling and share the results.
All right. So looks like option C has received the most, but close behind that is option E of I don't think any of these scenarios are a good fit for the study area. So that is the end of the visual preference survey. And just before we get to the open open comment part, just have 2 slides where I want to show examples of the 2 other proposed spaces. A lot of the island we talked about is being managed for wildlife habitat, and this is sort of an example of what that means. On the left, you see an existing picture from late this summer, just a little ways off of the existing road within the island, and it's heavily dominated by a handful of invasive exotic species. What's dominating in this picture is a vine called Oriental Bittersweet that is extremely prolific and chokes out trees quite quickly. And when this is managed and those few troublesome species are removed, what you get is a much more open understory. You get much healthier trees, and you're going to get much more usable habitat for the wildlife in our area. That's just a little visual cue of sort of what that visually might make difference. So by managing it, you get the environmental improvements, but you also can stand to achieve a lot of safety improvements via improved sight lines through areas that are planted. And then here's just an example or a picture of the existing older bridge piers being used by residents for fishing, and that in general this use and this aesthetic would stay the same. There might be slight additions such as depending on any sort of safety regulations, or some form of railing may be brought in, some form of seating off of the edge may be brought in addition to more formal paths to improve access to the space. So we're over, but thank you all for your time. I believe Catherine is going to be taking over and at this point and going over comments and fielding questions to whoever she thinks should be answering them.
Thank you, Chris. There were a couple suggestions that came through for you. Benches on the bridge would be nice. A place for pictures on the bridge, and hosting events on the bridge. One of the suggestions that came up a couple times were wheelchair accessibility and accessibility for the elderly to get down to the docks. So those were the suggestions for you. There was a question I'm going to ask Bill Safian. Will the power poles be removed during the rehab of the bridge?
My understanding is that all utilities that are currently there are to be removed, and if the desire is to have power or lighting to move forward on the island and be there for the future, it would have to be designed into the project and accepted as a project cost, and also accepted for responsibility of paying the bills, or the electric bill and the power bill and the maintenance costs.
Thank you. And another person asked how many people could safely be on the bridge, like standing.
Yeah, that's I don't have a number for that. I'd have, generally speaking, in design, we have loads that approximate a pedestrian load or a vehicular load, and we put that on the bridge and make sure it's safe. How we correspond that to an actual number of people, I guess some of the things I would say would be, it depends on a number of factors. The structure can hold so much. It's got to hold its own self-weight. It's got to hold the weight of the deck and the rail and all those things. If you want to put plantings on them, if you want to put fixed structures for having artwork displayed or benches, those kind of things that are permanently attached to the bridge, those have to be considered. We have to consider how much of the capacity those components are taking up and how much component is left for the emergency vehicle access. And then kind of in between those two loads you might be able to correlate that into, well, how much could you put on for additional load that might be a transient load, such as if you wanted to have an event on the bridge itself, where you're just not crossing the bridge to the island event, but you're having the event on the bridge itself. So all of that would have to be assessed in the design. It's very difficult to say a finite number of people.
Okay, thank you. There were a few questions about lighting and plowing of the bridge, and I think we've answered that question, that lighting and maintenance of the bridges has not been determined yet. So that we're going to move on from there. Somebody just wrote a very, very long question. I'm trying to read. Let's see. Vehicle, we'll have to consider vehicles, emergency vehicles getting on the bridge with benches and such. Restrooms have been a question. People giving suggestions of maybe using the building on the other side on Vermont for the restroom facility. Where would the soil come from to fix this spot? Additional soil comes from invasive species conquers in the wetland. All the wetland would be reviewed by the Department of Environmental Services before anything could happen. So those questions can't really be answered tonight. A lot of questions about parking and just lots of good questions.
Catherine, one thing I can say is that we will have access to the chat box at the end of this meeting, and any questions I'll review and see what questions were not answered tonight, and we can work with the experts here to answer questions if we can, and post those on the website that I mentioned earlier tonight. But I do see a few hands up too.
Yeah, maybe we should give time for people to just ask questions, and then you can, like you said, answer questions later that were in the chat.
Could I weigh in? Is this a good time, or should I be called on?
Chris, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I put together a proposal about coloring the bridges. I noticed that in this evening's presentations, there hasn't been any consideration of the bridges themselves as elements of the improvements, other than their rehabilitation. Did people, the decision makers in the room, get what I circulated? It was about 5 pages long with a few photos. Did you get that, Mr. Mack?
I have not shared that with the existing bridge, all of the existing bridges subcommittee yet. That will be shared with them.
Oh, great. Well,
but I've shared it with the co-chairs and the University of Massachusetts team.
Oh, you did. Good, good, good. Well, what I want to say is that I feel that the bridges are historic. They are landmarks. I think they benefit from having interpretive materials. You know, the fact that there hasn't been vandalism to the bridges indicates to me that if you were to do something nice with the bridges, like a nice new color, that they'd probably be left alone. I am concerned about vandalism on any improvements made to the island, considering there's really not much of a budget, and both towns have tight budgets, and then they're the ones who are going to have to maintain it. Getting back to the bridges, I think that bringing bringing attention to them by way of color and perhaps interpretive materials will help with the appreciation of the history of those bridges as they connected the two communities, and as pieces of architecture. They're nice. I mean, they're painted to be, so they're basically not to distract from other things, it seems to me. I'm not sure about that, but they're handsome. They both of them actually work well with the background, with the Mount Wantasket rising. It looms over the town, but in a benign fashion. And so as design elements, the bridges are nice. And I'd say to answer a couple other questions that I've seen here, I'm looking at what things already exist. People have asked about bathrooms, but there's going to be the new Amtrak station. I don't know how eager the Whetstone station would be to allow people in, but I would imagine that would help bring business to them by letting them use the 3 bathrooms that they have. I see that there are boat docks that are already in the area. There's Norms, which I understand now is going to be remain in place. You've got the proposed kayak launch, which seems marvelous. And you've already got moorings at the marina upstream, which is where most of the boat traffic comes from, that's on the river now. And as far as things like meeting places for community activities, that the foot of the bridge is going to be, of the Anna Marsh Bridge in Brattleboro, is going to be quite a nice place without having to plow lots of money into it. The River Porch Walk will be a nice amenity. The kayak launch, a nice amenity. There's going to be parking. But inland, we already have the very popular Living Memorial Park, about a mile inland, that has ball field, pool, picnic area, tennis courts, swings, an ice rink, views, and parking. It once even had a ski jump. And that made Brattleboro an all-American city a number of decades ago. And with regard to access for food trucks to serve the appetites of people in the area, there will be food trucks at the foot of the Anna Hunt Marsh Bridge in Brattleboro. So, I mean, that's a lot, but it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, because this is such an exciting project, and it's just so wonderful to see. And I think it bears saying that, bears mentioning that the thought that the engineers and designers have put into this is just phenomenal. I mean, the way they are envisioning a comprehensive set of improvements is great. I'm very grateful for that. I'm a Brattleboro native, and I had moved away and lived in a neighborhood in way north Manhattan for a number of years, and pined to come back to Brattleboro. And I've seen in the 25 years I've been back, seen tremendous improvements made to the area just near the bridge. And it's just a wonderful cultural heart of Brattleboro. And it's just nice to see that you're doing so much to accommodate so many more improvements. And I'd like to say that the bridges, if they were painted, I think would be more attractive, would attract people to that area to utilize it. That it would be appropriate to make the bridges stand out more because of their history, because of their architecture, because of the aesthetic appeal that they have just in the design that they were made with. So I'm really excited about what you're doing, and I just really wanted to say how much I appreciate it, and thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for those comments. I think we have a few other people.
I'd like to say a couple of things, JB. Chris, I want to thank you for your very strong advocacy, particularly for the letter that you circulated. my assumption was that everybody got it. I saw at least 60 people on the email, and was under the belief that everyone had received it. I'll make sure the entire committee receives it, to be sure. But you had a very strong and clear recommendation for a vibrantly painted, either red or yellow, for the bridges, and we appreciate that. I want to make sure you're aware that when New Hampshire DOT was talking about the rehab of the bridges, painting will come. It remains to be seen exactly what color gets chosen, but certainly a strong case has been made for a vibrant color, and we appreciate that from you. You know, I think one of the things that's really been a hit tonight is Chris's use of the, hey, what about small, medium, or more advanced, and sort of taking those sort of choices to the people, so to speak. I can envision at some point, maybe having a look at, hey, do you guys like brighter colors? Do you like more muted colors? I think you've made a strong case for vibrant colors, and I'd like to hear what other people are thinking as we move forward. There's a couple other things I'd like to touch on before we wrap up tonight, and I do think we need to start planning on wrapping up. This meeting was projected to close at 8 o'clock. We're heading towards 8:30, and I think we ought to try and wrap it up by then. There is some work, I know, or at least I suspect nearly everyone here has heard about the announcement of the coming Amtrak station, which is just another exciting development in this small area of town. Last night, sort of ancillary to that project, the Brattleboro Select Board were considering options for expanded replacement parking. You can just barely see it, but on the picture, which is on the screen here, but the train station is going to be occupying about 10 parking spaces in what is already a pretty small parking lot. And so the town's exploring options for expanded parking that would be situated in the roundabout and on the space where the archery building currently sits. That particular project is kind of in the development stage. It's received backing from the select board last night, less than 24 hours ago. And so that's something I certainly want to share with Chris, and so that can be incorporated into future designs for this area. Whether or not that project will be permitted remains to be seen, but there's clearly going to be a need for replacement parking and additional parking in support of what is being lost as a consequence of the train station development. And we think as long as we're going to be doing that, we should be doing it more than just replacing what's being lost, but to take an opportunity and expand upon what's there. One other point I'd like to make with respect to what was said about the lighting. I know it's New Hampshire DOT's position that there's no need for them to maintain lighting on what will no longer be a transportation investment or piece of property. I think from the standpoint of a vision, one of the things the committee has made really clear is that it believes whatever gets constructed here should be safe and clean. And we think it's probably important that there be lighting for public safety reasons. It's absolutely an up in the air question. Who's going to own this area? Who's going to maintain it? Who's going to staff it? Those are all questions that remain unanswered at this hour. But I think it would be safe to say that if these spaces are going to be accessible at night to pedestrians, then some form of lighting would probably be a worthwhile thing to incorporate. We got just another couple of minutes. Are there any questions that you see, Catherine, from the chat box that are calling out for immediate attention?
No, but I see that there's a couple people with their hands raised.
Okay. Why don't we see if we can hear from each of these two, and maybe we can call it an evening. So why don't we hear from Robert Ryan?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for their feedback and also to acknowledge that some of the things in the chat, Chris has already thought about in this plan, but we didn't present tonight because we wanted to present certain areas. So at our last meeting, someone has suggested restroom facilities. And so I know Chris has looked at some potential locations for that on the island. So we can present those next time. Handicap access to the island was a priority. So I know at least the upper areas that he's shown, they're all handicap accessible. And we're looking at how to get people down to the water's edge at a gentle slope. And so the pathways you see down to the water's edge are ADA accessible in grade. But the really issue I think for folks to think about would be the materiality and the amount of construction that would have to happen to make them waterproof and plowable. To sort of get people down there is more the issue, I think. So we're looking at trying to get at least access to the upper areas for sure for people in wheelchairs, and then it's going to be depend on sort of construction cost, whether someone in a wheelchair would get down to the water's edge, but I think that would be obviously a worthwhile goal. We did think of the painting of the bridge. We didn't present it tonight because it was kind of late when we got it. But certainly that could be an option, and we could show alternatives with different colors that people could relate to, I think. But I wanted at least touch some of those comments that were in the chat and respond to them, at least that we'd thought of those, but didn't present them all tonight, but they're part of the overall plan right now. And I'd like to second Patrick's point about lighting on the island. I think it's very important both aesthetically to maybe light those bridges up, but absolutely for public safety. There was nothing in our plans, and I've never seen one saying, let's close the island at night, at least let's gate it. So it may be that people aren't allowed there after dusk, but I think that people will use it after dusk. So having lighting, I think, is very important at some level. So, Chris, do you have more to add as well?
I think you brought up and addressed some of the points I wanted to that I was seeing in the chat. And while there's definitely more to say on the topics, as Patrick has pointed out, we're getting on 8:30 and I don't want to run this meeting too late. So I think they're important topics and they'll receive more attention in future meetings as time allows.
Yeah, thank you both. The team at UMASS-Amherst is bringing real talent and capacity to this project, and we couldn't be doing what we're doing without you. I know next steps, the subcommittee is going to be having a meeting later in December to sort of talk about what we've heard tonight. I know that there will be additional presentations. We really got to get the word out. We got to see if we can drive up participation at some of these future meetings. But I know that there will be development that Chris and the UMass team will be working on, and we'll have some exciting new things to be looking at in the not too distant future. Once again, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. JB, any closing remarks?
No, the only thing is visit the SWRPC website if you haven't participated in the survey yet. You can also, as part of that survey, you can also drop your email if you want to know about the existing bridges subcommittee meetings. The next one's on December 18th at 1 o'clock, and we'll make those accessible by Zoom as well.
Outstanding. Thank you, JB. We appreciate your excellent support. Want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you, New Hampshire DOT. Thank you, all the members of the public. Thank you, our friends at UMass-Amherst. Have a good night.
You too.
Take care.